Following a developing story involving yet another one of President Trump's U.S. attorneys. A federal appeals court ruled that Alina Habba, the president's former personal attorney, is unlawfully serving as the U.S. attorney in New Jersey. It's the same reason a federal judge in Virginia dismissed the Justice Department's cases against James Comey and Letitia James. CNN's Caitlin Polantz is following the story. Seeing a pattern here, Caitlin.
There is a bit of a pattern. The big picture is that the appeals court today, now this is appeals court that only applies to Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, of course. What they are saying is that the Justice Department, the Trump administration, they can't do a runaround.
Okay, so this just happened, and it's honestly one of the most significant setbacks Trump's faced in his entire second term so far. A federal appeals court just ruled that Alina Habba, Trump's former personal lawyer who he installed as the acting U.S. attorney for New Jersey, was never legally allowed to have that job in the first place. Not only that, but the court said her entire appointment was unlawful, and they did it unanimously. 3 judges all saying the same thing. Trump tried to bypass Senate confirmation by using some legal trick with the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, and the appeals court shut it down completely. This is huge because Habba has been running cases in New Jersey. She's been prosecuting people. She's been making decisions that affect actual people's lives. And now all of that is potentially at risk. This is the kind of ruling that doesn't just disqualify one person. It potentially unravels an entire prosecutorial strategy. The ruling came down on December 1st, and it's not some weak decision that Trump can just ignore. The court was very clear about this. The way Trump installed Habba violated federal law. The judges looked at what the administration did and basically said, yeah, that doesn't work. You can't just appoint people however you want. There are rules, there are procedures, and you can't get around them by being creative with the law. This is the second time in just a few weeks that one of Trump's prosecutors has been ruled unlawfully appointed. Just last week, another prosecutor named Lindsay Halligan was disqualified too. And when that happened, cases that she was handling against James Comey and Letitia, James got dismissed. Just went away. Because if the prosecutor didn't have the legal authority to be prosecuting in the first place, then all the cases she brought are questionable. Judge Michael Fisher, one of the 3 judges who ruled against Habba, wrote something really telling. He said the Trump administration has encountered challenges due to various legal and political obstacles in placing its appointees, which is basically the court saying, yeah, we see what you're doing. You want these people in these jobs, but you have to follow the law to do it. You can't just find workarounds. The judge is basically saying to Trump, your way doesn't work. So now what? Habba is out. She's disqualified. And the New Jersey U.S. Attorney's Office is in chaos right now. There are dozens and dozens of cases that she was handling. Criminal cases, cases involving federal crimes, cases that could affect real people's freedom and futures. And now those cases are hanging in the balance because the person prosecuting them had no legal right to be there. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the weadlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. This is crazy because Habba was supposed to be Trump's enforcer. She defended him during his New York civil fraud trial. She stood by him during the E. Jean Carroll defamation case. She was his personal lawyer, his loyalist, someone he trusted completely. And Trump was like, okay, I'm going to put you in charge of prosecuting in New Jersey. I'm going to give you federal power. I'm going to make you the U.S. attorney. But he did it illegally. He did it in a way that doesn't hold up in court. And now the whole thing has blown up in his face. This isn't just a minor legal technicality.
Acting U.S. Attorney for New Jersey, Alina Habba, has been disqualified from the position.
A federal appeals court has ruled that she was unlawfully appointed, exhausting the Justice Department's options to appeal. Alan Devlin is in studio here with all this means and also what's next for her position, Alan.
Yeah, good evening, ladies. This one is complicated. At least that's what the experts are telling us now. They say the basis of these claims is that there was little to no involvement from the legislative branch in Habba's appointment, which can be interpreted as going against the U.S. Constitution.
This is a federal appeals court telling Trump that his entire approach to staffing the Justice Department is unlawful. Like, can you believe this? The guy came into his second term thinking he could just install whoever he wanted in whatever position and nobody could stop him. And the courts are literally saying, actually, no, there are laws about this. What's wild is the timing of all this. Trump's approval rating just dropped to 36%. That's historically low. That's a second-term low for him specifically. People are looking at this administration and they're seeing chaos. They're seeing things falling apart right in front of them. They're seeing the president try to do things and then get blocked by courts. And this Haba thing is just another example of it. Another example of Trump trying to grab more power, trying to bypass the rules, trying to install his people in positions where they can help him, and it's not working. The courts keep shutting him down. And now prosecutors are being disqualified, cases are being dismissed. The whole operation is getting messier by the day, and we're only a couple months into the second term. Think about that for a second. We're not even at the 100-day mark, and already we've got multiple Trump appointees being ruled unlawfully appointed by federal courts. That's not normal. That's not how a functional administration operates. Let's dig into what actually happened here and why it matters so much more than people realize at first glance. You've got to understand the Federal Vacancies Reform Act because that's the centerpiece of this whole story. This is a real law that exists. It's been around since 1998, and it was designed to handle a specific situation. Sometimes federal positions open up, sometimes people retire or resign or get fired, and you need someone to temporarily fill that role until you can get someone properly appointed through the normal Senate confirmation process. The law says the president can appoint someone into an acting capacity in that position, but there are restrictions. There are limits on how long someone can serve in an acting capacity, and there are rules about who is eligible to be appointed to that role in the first place. This isn't some obscure technicality that nobody pays attention to. This is a law that was specifically written to prevent presidents from doing exactly what Trump is trying to do, which is bypass Senate confirmation and just put whoever they want into powerful positions. Trump's administration tried to use this law to get around the Senate confirmation requirement for Haba. They appointed her as the acting U.S. Attorney for New Jersey in July 2025. But here's the problem. She didn't meet the qualifications under the Vacancies Act. The law says the person appointed has to be either a career federal employee with a certain amount of experience or someone who's been confirmed by the Senate in some other role. Haba had never been confirmed by the Senate for anything. She was Trump's personal lawyer. That doesn't count under the law, so when she got appointed acting U.S. attorney, it violated the statute. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals looked at this and said, yeah, that's unlawful. You can't do that. You can't just appoint your personal lawyer to a federal position like that. And this is important because it shows that Trump's legal team either didn't understand the law or they understood it and just decided to ignore it. Either way, that's incompetence. That's what this ruling exposes. Judge Michael Fisher, who wrote the opinion, was really clear about it. He said the administration had tried to use the first assistant attorney, basically a subordinate position, to get Haba into the acting U.S. attorney role. But that doesn't work either according to the law. The judges looked at what's called the statutory chain of succession, which basically says here's the order of people who can become acting attorney if the main person leaves. Haba wasn't in that chain. She was never eligible to be in that chain because she's not a career federal employee and she's not been confirmed by the Senate. So it doesn't matter how creative you get with legal arguments. It doesn't matter what clever maneuvers you try. She just wasn't legally allowed to be in that position. The law is the law. And what's really interesting is that the court didn't just say, well, this is questionable. They didn't say, there are arguments on both sides. They said, no, this is clearly unlawful. This is not a close call. You violated the statute, period. And this is happening as part of a much bigger pattern we're seeing in the Trump administration. Last week, Lindsay Halligan, another Trump prosecutor, was also ruled unlawfully appointed. And when that ruling came down, cases she had been handling against James Comey and Letitia, James got dismissed, just gone. Because if the prosecutor never had the authority to bring those cases, then the cases themselves become invalid. That's a real consequence. That's real people getting freed from prosecution because the system has rules and those rules matter. And now we're seeing it happen again with Haba. This is becoming a pattern that Trump's administration can't seem to stop. Like, at what point does someone in the White House say, hey, maybe we should actually check if we're allowed to do this before we do it? At what point does someone say, maybe we should have actual lawyers look at this instead of just doing whatever Trump wants and hoping it works out? What Trump's trying to do is obvious if you step back and look at the pattern. He wants to reshape the Justice Department completely. He wants to put his loyalists in key positions. He wants people who will investigate his political enemies and prosecute the people he wants prosecuted. He wants the federal government as a weapon. But the problem is the Senate. The Senate has to confirm these people. Or at least that's supposed to be how it works. That's what the Constitution says. So Trump's administration has been trying to find workarounds. They're trying to use the Vacancies Act in ways that probably weren't intended. They're trying to be creative with the law. But the courts keep saying, no, you can't do that. There are laws. You have to follow them. You don't get a pass just because you're the president. You don't get special treatment just because you really want something. The rules apply to everyone, even you. The question now is what happens to all the cases Haba was handling? That's actually a really important question that people are asking. According to reports, there were dozens and dozens of cases, criminal cases, cases that could result in people going to prison. And if Haba didn't have the authority to prosecute them, then there are serious questions about whether those convictions stand, whether those prosecutions are valid, whether charges should be dismissed. This is a nightmare for the Trump administration because it means cases are potentially falling apart. People who were prosecuted by Haba might walk free. Evidence that was gathered under her authority might be challenged. The whole operation becomes questionable. You can't have prosecutors making decisions and bringing charges if they don't have legal authority to be prosecutors in the first place. And think about the victims in these cases. Think about the people who were counting on justice being served. Now they're looking at this situation and wondering, is my case going to fall apart because the prosecutor wasn't legally allowed to be there? That's not fair to them. That's not how the system is supposed to work. And what's really interesting is the language from the judges. Judge Fisher wrote that it's evident the administration has encountered challenges due to various legal and political obstacles in placing its appointees. That's the court basically saying, we see what you're doing. We understand what you're trying to do. You want these people in these jobs, but you have to follow the law. The Constitution and federal statutes don't change because you want something badly enough. You still have to follow the procedures that Congress wrote into law, and if you don't, we'll overturn it. The judges are saying this isn't complicated. This isn't some gray area where reasonable people disagree. You violated a pretty clear law. So here's the consequence, and that consequence is that Haba is out, and everything she did while she was unlawfully in that position is now questionable. That's how serious this is. That's how big of a deal this ruling actually is when you dig into it. Okay, so let's break down why this actually matters and what it means for Trump's second term going forward. Because this isn't just about one person losing one job, this is about something much bigger. Number one, this destroys Trump's control over the DOJ. Trump came into his second term with very specific goals for the Justice Department. He wanted to investigate his enemies. He wanted to prosecute people who he feels wronged him over the years. He wanted to use federal power to go after Democrats and people who stood against him. And the way to do that is to have loyalists in key positions, people who will do what he wants, people who won't stand in his way or question his orders. Haba was supposed to be one of those people. She was his personal lawyer for years. She's clearly loyal to him. She defended him in civil trials. She took bullets for him in the media. But the problem is, you can't just appoint people to federal positions however you want. There's a constitution. There are laws. There are procedures. And this appeals court just said, you can't get around those procedures. You can't use legal tricks to bypass Senate confirmation. You have to follow the rules. And if you don't, we'll shut it down. So now Trump has to start over. He has to find someone who's actually legally eligible to be the U.S. Attorney for New Jersey. And that person might not be as loyal. That person might not be as willing to do whatever Trump wants. That's a loss of control. That's a loss of power. Number two, this creates a precedent that could disqualify others. If Haba was unlawfully appointed, then the question becomes how many other people did Trump appoint the same way? How many other acting officials got put into positions they weren't legally entitled to hold? There could be dozens. There could be hundreds across the government. And now that the appeals court has ruled that you can't use the Vacancies Act this way, there's a roadmap for challenging those other appointments. Democratic lawyers are already looking at this ruling. They're seeing what happened with Haba and Halligan, and they're thinking, okay, we can challenge these other appointments too. This one ruling could potentially bring down multiple Trump appointees across the government. That's a real domino effect. That's a real problem for the Trump administration because it means the entire foundation of Trump's personnel strategy is at risk. Imagine if 20 or 30 Trump appointees get challenged and disqualified over the next few months using this same legal reasoning. That would be chaos. That would completely derail Trump's agenda. And it's not impossible. It's actually pretty likely given how aggressive Trump has been about bypassing normal confirmation procedures. Number three, this shows Trump's control is slipping. Trump came into this second term with a lot of momentum. He won the election. Republicans control Congress. He's got the presidency. You'd think he'd have a lot of power to do what he wants, but he keeps running into legal obstacles. The courts keep shutting him down. Haba gets disqualified. Halligan gets disqualified. Cases get dismissed. Judges block his policies. These are real defeats. These are real setbacks, and they add up. They start to create a narrative that this administration is chaotic, that it's dysfunctional, that Trump can't even get his own people legally installed in positions of power, that he's trying to break the rules and the system keeps stopping him. And voters notice this stuff. They see the headlines. They hear about these court rulings, and they start to wonder, is this guy actually in control? Does he know what he's doing? Or is he just making it up as he goes and hoping nobody stops him? Now look at Trump's approval rating. It's at 36%. That's low. That's historically low for him in his second term. People are looking at this administration and they're seeing incompetence mixed with desperation. They're seeing someone who's willing to bend rules and break laws to get what he wants, but who keeps getting stopped by the courts. And voters don't like that. They don't like chaos. They don't like dysfunction. They want government to work. They want stability. And this story, Haba getting disqualified, is just one more example of things falling apart. One more example of Trump losing control of his own administration. One more example of the president being unable to execute his vision because he can't or won't follow the basic rules that govern how the federal government operates. So, what comes next? Well, the Trump administration is going to have to figure out who's legally allowed to be the U.S. Attorney for New Jersey now. They're going to have to follow the actual procedures. They're probably going to have to go through Senate confirmation, which means compromise, which means Democratic input, which means they might not get exactly who they want. That's a loss for them, but it's also a win for the rule of law. It's a win for the idea that you can't just appoint people however you want. There are rules, and the courts will enforce those rules. And honestly, this is how the system is supposed to work. The courts are supposed to be a check on executive power. They're supposed to say, no, you can't do that when the president tries to overstep. That's the whole point of having three branches of government. So in a weird way, even though this is embarrassing for Trump, it's actually reassuring for the country. It shows the system still works. It shows courts are still willing to push back against presidential overreach. And there's another implication here that people need to think about. If all these prosecutors that Trump appointed unlawfully get disqualified, then the cases they brought become questionable. People might get released from prison, convictions might be overturned. That's a consequence of breaking the law to appoint people. You don't get to keep the power you gained illegally. The courts will take it away. And everything that happened while you were in that illegal position becomes tainted. Everything becomes open to challenge. This is why judges take these rules seriously. This is why the appointment process matters. Because when you cut corners and bypass procedures, the work that gets done under those illegal appointments becomes vulnerable. It becomes challengeable. And that's not fair to anyone. Not to the victims of crimes, not to the defendants who deserve proper prosecution, not to the American people who deserve a Justice Department that operates within the law. This is why this story matters so much right now. It's not just about Alina Habba. It's about Trump's ability to control the federal government. It's about whether he can appoint his loyalists to positions of power or whether the courts will keep blocking him. It's about whether he can use the Justice Department as a weapon against his enemies or whether the law will stop him. And right now, the law is winning. The courts are saying, no, you can't do this. There are rules. Follow them. And Trump has to listen because these are federal appeals courts. These are serious judges making serious rulings. These aren't political hacks. These aren't Democratic activists in robes. These are real judges looking at real law and saying, this doesn't work. This violates the statute. This is unlawful. The bigger picture is that Trump's second term is getting messier by the day. Habba disqualified. Halligan disqualified. Other legal challenges coming. His approval rating tanking. And we're only a couple months in. This is the pace we're on. This is what his administration looks like when it's running into the rule of law. When it's running into courts that say, actually, no, you can't do that. It's going to be a long 2 years. And stories like this one are going to keep coming because Trump keeps trying to bend the rules and the courts keep stopping him. Every time he tries to take a shortcut, someone challenges it. Every time he tries to bypass normal procedures, a judge steps in. That's the reality of governing in America. You can't just do whatever you want. There are constraints, there are limits, and if you ignore them, you'll pay the price. Stay tuned because this is far from over.